And it's time now for Newsmakers, where we dissect the weekly news agenda both here and overseas. And joining us are Oliver Hartwich from the Centre for Independent Studies and Sally McManus from the Australian Services Union. Welcome to both.
Good morning.
Just before we get on to our regular topics, I'd just like to ask for your reaction to Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese dissident, being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Oliver Hartwich.
I think it was a very good decision. It's also a very courageous decision because we know that the Chinese put a lot of pressure on the Nobel Prize Committee, but I think it underlines a theme in this year's Nobel Prizes. We had Mario Vargas Llosa, and he's definitely a committed as a defender of liberty and freedom, and now we have a freedom and democracy fighter in China, and I think it's a very good decision.
Sally McManus?
I agree. I think it's an excellent decision too. I mean, this man's shown incredible self-sacrifice. He's been in jail for so long for standing up for his beliefs, being a political dissident. It's ironic, really, that in Australia that we lock people up if they come as refugees for the same reason.
But will it actually achieve anything in terms of China? Is it going to change China's attitudes?
Well, once again, it throws a spotlight back onto the regime and the fact that they've got a very bad human rights record, so I think that can only be a good thing.
Okay, well this week our political leaders travelled abroad and what started out as a simple visit to Afghanistan. Let's listen to what they had to say.
Foreign policy is not my passion. It's not what I've spent my life doing. I came into politics predominantly to make a difference to opportunity questions, particularly make a difference in education. So, yes, if I had a choice, I'd probably more be in a school watching kids learn to read in Australia than here in Brussels at international meetings.
I thought it was important to do this trip justice, and I didn't want to get here in an entirely jet-lagged condition, and so I'm in a position to make the most of this opportunity.
Sally McManus, if I can come to you first, what did you make of this overseas trip and what did they actually achieve by it?
Well, I think Tony Abbott brought a lot of this on himself, this whole jet lag drama. I think because he makes himself out to be a hypo-macho man. He stayed awake the whole time on the last day of the election campaign. He just sort of, set himself up for the punch, that you were worried about jet lag. So I think that was inevitable. I think the other question it raises about Afghanistan is the bipartisan support. I mean, there's been no questioning of, well, why are we actually there? So I think that's something that's in people's mind in the background, especially considering so many young Australians have now lost their lives.
Oliver Hartwich, we heard Julia Gillard say that, foreign policy wasn't one of her strengths, and I think one of the commentators described them as gormless yokels as they travelled overseas. What does it say about how Parliament is going to be set up in the future, given the way they've performed overseas?
Well, I think both leaders didn't quite show the foreign policy leadership that we expected from them. I think when you're Prime Minister, that's part of your job description, that you travel abroad, that you meet with other foreign leaders, and that you actually develop some foreign policy ideas of your own. I think it is silly to say that she would rather like to visit schools. I mean, I would rather like to do other things as well in my job, but I have to do them. And in any case, if she rather wanted to be a school minister, she should have stayed a school minister.
In terms of how things are going to be conducted in future, basically the tit-for-tat nature of this one trip, is that a sign of the times, do you think? It
is not very promising because I think especially Afghanistan needs bipartisanship. It needs a dialogue between the two parties, really how to take the issue forward. And I think this tit-for-tat and this kind of engagement of the two leaders, if you can call it that we have seen this week, is definitely not what we need.
Okay. Now this week, your centre actually, Oliver Hartwich, produced a new report on the population, and you were one of the authors. Just tell me first, 29 million people by 2050. Is that surprising?
Well, first of all, that's not a forecast. That is what would happen only if we cut migration by more than half. That's the kind of level of migration that population campaigners like Bob Carr and Dick Smith would like to see. We only illustrated that even under their restrictive migration assumptions, we would still see a rising population. But I think it is far more likely that Kevin Rudd is actually right, that we will end up with a 35 or 36 million people by 2050.
And is that a surprise, though? I mean, that actually seems like quite a natural progression, given that we're already about 22 million.
It's only surprising that people are surprised because it is already programmed in. Because we have strong fertility rates, we have strong inward migration, we have a relatively young population, and this relatively young population can expect to live much longer. We have increasing longevity, which is a great thing. But because of all these factors, we can expect a much further rising population by 2050.
Sally McManus, your view on the population debate?
I think the whole of Small Australia is basically an election slogan. It was something made up in the context of an election, on one hand to make people who are leaving Labor for the Greens happy because we're talking about sustainable population. On the other hand, it was really dog whistle politics, appealing to people who are worried about uncontrolled migration. Refugees are the symbol for that for people. So I think it's ridiculous. Who's going to look after the baby boomers when they're in aged care facilities? I mean, there's going to need to be a bigger population to be able to cope with basic things.
Are you surprised that the whole population issue seems to have fallen off the agenda since the end of the election?
No, for exactly the same reason. I think it was just used to try and blunten the anxiety of people in big cities where their infrastructure doesn't cope with their day-to-day lives. It takes an hour and a half to get to work in Sydney.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask next. I mean, shouldn't the whole discussion really be on our infrastructure spending?
Exactly. I think we've got the whole population debate wrong because we've got a federal population minister and there's very little that the federal government can really do to control our future population size. What we do need instead is more infrastructure planning, and we need to cope with a rising and growing population. And I think that's where we've got it wrong. And a lot of the policies require state policies and local government policies. And I think that's where we actually have to have a debate. How are we going to provide water facilities? How are we going to provide roads and rails, port facilities, old age care? I think these are the real challenges.
Okay. There's been a call for a standard approach to the use of tasers, which were linked to the death of a Sydney man this week. First, let's hear from the New South Wales Police Commissioner, Andrew Scipione.
We will provide a report to the coroner, but I can be very clear about the following. Officers went to the front and to the rear of the house. At the rear of the house, those officers were confronted by the man, who we believe was seriously affected by alcohol and was wielding 2 knives. In a split second, the officers made a decision which I believe may have saved their lives. One officer, armed with a taser, was able to discharge the weapon at a close range to disable the offender. Had he not been successful, I certainly believe the consequences could have been tragic for one or for both of the officers involved.
Now, that's the New South Wales Police Commissioner. In addition, the WA Crime Commission also released footage this week showing a man who was tasered 13 times in a police watch house. He was actually unarmed at the time. I wonder, is this the way this weapon should be used?
I think this is what happens when you give people a weapon and you say it's going to hurt people but it won't kill them. People overuse it. It's quite clear there's something wrong. For someone to be tasered 13 times, I've seen videos, practice ones, where police officers all dressed up and they taser them once and they go down like a screaming heap. I mean, 13 times is obviously, there's a big problem there. I think there needs to be some investigation into the use of tasers and tasers full stop. Why are they killing people?
Oliver Hartwich?
I completely agree. I think tasers were promised to replace handguns, and of course everybody would rather like to be tasered rather than shot. But still, it leads to the question of overuse. Is it actually used on occasions when people wouldn't usually have used a gun? And is it just used as a disciplining tool? And I think we need more and stricter regulations for the use of tasers in the police force.
I wonder why the police feel they need such a powerful weapon, because basically that's what it is. It's a weapon.
I think there is an issue of self-defence, and in situations with police officers, I mean, there will be circumstances where these things happen. I accept that. What I don't accept is that we'd be in a situation where police officers are armed with a weapon that they think won't kill people and then it ends up killing people. I think that that's the big problem. Just
very quickly, Oliver Hartwich, should there be federal oversight?
No, I think this could be regulated on a state level. I don't think we need the federal government's involvement in all of this. We have state police forces, and I think they should be able to regulate it by themselves.
All right. Well, Oliver Hartwich and Sally McManus, thanks so much for joining us on Newsmakers today.
Thank you.